Well, the theme that we are exploring for the month of July here at First Unitarian is actually two themes: freedom and responsibility. Now, when two ideas are presented as the theme, I actually interpret that to mean that the theme is really about not one or the other, but the relationship between the two. So we can think about freedom, and we can think about responsibility, and we can also consider why and how those two ideas are connected. Now, in examining the relationship between freedom and responsibility, I think it's fair to say that they are in many ways opposites. However, they are not just opposites. They are opposites that come together as a package deal, like two sides of a coin. You cannot have one without the other. Now, since we're not only going to be exploring the two themes, but also how they're related, let's first talk about freedom and responsibility and what each of those means. So what I'd like to do is bring this one up here. And I'm curious if anybody has some ideas of what we're talking about when we talk about freedom. What does freedom mean? Anyone? I know the answers, but I looked it up and I knew I was going to ask. So, anyone have an idea? What does freedom mean? Yeah.
Choices or options.
Okay, choices, options, autonomy. Right? Good. Anything else to add to that?
I know that as I've aged, I've changed my notions that freedom meant freedom of action early on, and now freedom of thought as I've aged.
Okay. So the ability to think what you want to think, to act as you want to act, right? What else? Do you have something else?
Freedom is not only to have my own beliefs and thoughts, but to express them and hear other people's freedom.
Okay, so the right to express those as well. Okay, yes. All right, good time for one more here. What's freedom?
Responsibility to maintain that freedom.
Ooh, okay. You're jumping ahead of me here. No, that's good. Because we're talking about freedom and responsibility and how those come together, right? So my next question is going to be, what is responsibility? We talked about freedom being autonomy and choices and the ability to act as we wish to, the ability to think what we wish to, the ability to say what we want to. Those are freedoms. Now, what about the responsibility side of things?
Responsibility to educate myself and continually grow.
Okay, so that's a responsibility you've taken on. And why, excuse me, I'm sorry. So what is a responsibility? What is that you're called to do when you're doing that growth and that learning? So consequences. There's consequences to not following through with your responsibilities. Okay. Yeah.
The ability to respond, that I maintain an ability to respond.
An ability to respond. Okay. All right. What else? What are we talking about when we talk about responsibility?
If we are free, our responsibility ends where our nose ends. We need to allow others to be free.
So our responsibility with freedom is to allow others to have that freedom as well. Yeah.
Responsibility is the consideration of how our actions affect other people and the world at large. So it's other-directed as opposed to self-directed.
Okay, yeah. All right, one more.
Responsibilities part element of relationship with yourself and others.
Okay, requires knowing yourself, knowing others, being in relationship with both. Yeah. What about, is there a sense of obligation with responsibilities? A sense of needing to do it because it has to get done? And when it's paired with freedom, it's what needs to be done in order to have that freedom, right? The responsibility that comes along with it. I appreciate all the extra hands up. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next part here, but thank you for those wise and insightful answers. In comparing the two, freedom and responsibility, does one sound more, I don't know, fun, appealing, positive, desirable than the other? Yeah? Yeah, I think so, right? And so what your answers affirmed is something that I've thought pretty much my entire life, and that is that freedom is the positive side of the coin, and responsibilities are the burden, or the weight of the coin is in the burden side. That's the part that we have to put up with in order to have the freedoms that we get to enjoy. So in other words, the freedom has that positive connotation and responsibility tends to have the negative one. But I wonder, does it have to be that way? I did hear some positive answers when it came to responsibilities. Is there another way of thinking about these two interrelated ideas? Maybe we can shake up the way we've always thought about them. Maybe rather than attaching qualifiers to them and assigning one as strictly positive while the other is strictly negative, what if we thought of them as complementary opposites, with both of them having positive and negative attributes? So for example, if I wanted to describe a lack of boundaries and a lack of restrictions, what if I said chaos instead of freedom? It does seem to me that limitless freedom, taken to its extreme, tends to resemble chaos and anarchy. And on the other side of things, isn't responsibility more than just a burden? When it's utilized properly, a sense of responsibility can provide the structure necessary for anything good to be sustainable. Responsibility is the basis for trust and accountability. And so, if I said that instead of freedom and responsibility, our theme this month is chaos and covenant, would that change how you think of them? Would that change your positive and negative associations? If I said chaos and covenant, which one has the negative connotation there? Yeah. So I really don't think I need to try too hard to convince you that freedom has both positive and negative aspects. It seems to me like you got that from the answers I heard. So what I want to focus on is that other side. I want to focus on that responsibility side of the coin. And because you likely don't need any help to see the ways in which responsibility can be a burden, I'm going to spend most of our time today considering the ways in which it can be a blessing. That's weird, right? Responsibility as a blessing. So the positive synonym that I chose for responsibility is covenant. And I did so because it was the most positive and beautiful example that I could think of for structure, order, and accountability. I want to take a moment to talk about what I mean when I say covenant. I'm going to be talking about it in a religious context, and specifically a Unitarian Universalist context, because it's Sunday, and this is church. Covenant is a special concept to us as Unitarian Universalists. It's not unique to us. We're not the only ones who have a concept of covenant or apply it in our religious teachings, but the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament refer to covenants between God and humans. And in fact, Christians believe that the new covenant established by Jesus erased the old covenants of the Hebrew Bible. But in all cases, covenant means an agreement. Now, for Jewish folks and Christians, the covenants in the Bible between human and God but Unitarian Universalists use covenants as agreements that are between people, and they are especially used in the context of community. We're really big on covenants. Now, I want to reiterate that covenants are not a contract. A contract is transactional in nature. You agree to do X, and I agree to do Y, and we put it in writing. And if you violate the terms of the contract either becomes null and void, or there are penalties and repercussions. A covenant, on the other hand, is relational. It's about how we agree to be with one another and how to relate to one another. And if the covenant is broken, rather than walk away or enforce punitive measures, we call on each other to make amends and to come back into covenant. The goal is not punishment, but atonement and right relationship. Now, I mentioned that the concept of covenant is not exclusive to Unitarian Universalists, but we are unique in how we use it. Most religions are creedal in nature, meaning that the unifying thing about them is that their membership is based on a shared belief in a common theological creed. Or more simply put, they all have the same belief about the divine. But we Unitarian Universalists don't have a creed. Our fourth principle affirms and promotes a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, which means that we embrace a variety of theological beliefs, and so a shared belief in a common creed is not the unifying factor that brings us and holds us together. Rather than creed, we are built on covenant. And being a covenantal faith tradition means that we agree on being in right relationship rather than on having the right belief. I tell you all of this so that you understand just how important covenant is to our faith tradition. It is the cornerstone upon which everything else is built. Without covenant, we would be in chaos. Covenant gives us order. It is the basis for trust and accountability that makes clear what our responsibilities are to each other. As humans, we seek order. I think we actually crave covenant. We want to know we can trust ourselves, each other, and the world. We want to connect with something greater than our individual selves, even if that is the covenanted community itself. It doesn't have to be something ethereal. And we want there to be something, or some things, that we can count on. Something certain to build a foundation upon. For French philosopher René Descartes, that foundation was his own consciousness. I think, therefore I am. If nothing else, he knew that to be true. And that was his foundational certainty that he built his entire philosophy on. And although we may not be remembered as world-renowned philosophers, we do the same important work of identifying the foundational truths in our lives and building a worldview that tells us how to show up in the world and with each other. Covenant is the foundation for trust that makes all of this possible. And covenant is not just the cornerstone of Unitarian Universalism, it is the foundation upon which I have chosen to trust and to build my life's purpose on. When I was in my mid-20s, I moved from Colorado to Austin, Texas to start a new branch of my family's countertop and bathtub resurfacing business. And not only that, I was fresh out of a divorce. In that new city, where I knew no one, I had never felt so alone. And this drew me to my first Unitarian Universalist church, a place built on covenant. And what they built there was a beloved community, where I was able to find acceptance and start a long process of healing my loneliness and the wounds from my divorce. So a year later, when I moved back to Colorado, I immediately found a Unitarian Universalist church in Denver. And after a couple of years of deepening my connection there, transforming and growing, I knew that I wanted to devote my life to creating the beloved community as a Unitarian Universalist minister. Ours is a life-saving, life-affirming faith. And we are not built on creed. We are built on covenant. A mutually agreed upon understanding, as Reverend Sarah Moldenhauer Salazar puts it, of who we say we will be for each other. We are bound because we say we are, because we choose each other, because we choose to walk together. A covenantal faith means that we will strive to be our best selves for one another and in service to the world. Now, please keep in mind that we humans are not perfect, and living into covenant isn't always easy. In fact, I hate to break it to you, but we are doomed to fail. We will ultimately break our covenants to each other. All of us, every single one. Because we are not perfect people, and we all fall short of living up to the best version of ourselves all of the time. And believe me, I know how difficult and painful it can be when your beloved community fails to live up to its covenants. And when we are on the receiving end of a broken covenant, it can be tempting to want to just walk away from it entirely. But especially in the times when we're feeling hurt and frustrated, remember that chaos and covenant are two sides of the same coin. That covenant is the answer to the chaos of the world. And that is why we try again. Sufi poet Rumi said, "Though you've broken your vows 1,000 times, come yet again, come." And as a beloved community right here, built on covenant, we have a responsibility to strive to be our best selves for one another and in the service to the world. May we see this responsibility not as a burden, but as the blessing that it is.